Hello and welcome to this half an hour session on how to ace an assessment centre. Assessment centres are something that you may be expected to do when shortlisted in graduate recruitment processes, and I hope this session today is going to be very beneficial to you. So what are we going to be covering in this session? Well, I'm going to talk about what an assessment centre involves, why assessment centres are popular with recruiters, and I'll give you some top tips for individual assessment centre activities, and then finish with some top tips for group assessment centre activities. So first of all, let me introduce to you the Grad Consult recipe for success and why this is important to consider when preparing for those assessment centres. There are 4 key ingredients for the recipe of success when it comes to getting a graduate level job. Firstly, to have made it to an assessment centre, you would have had to source a suitable graduate role. This means you knew where to look. You looked past job titles and you were able to differentiate between different job opportunities. You've then researched the role and the organisation really, really well. And then you have to stand out. And research is really the key to doing that, to demonstrating your passion for that organisation, for the industry and for the role itself. You likely would have done this already in your application and in a telephone interview or pre-recorded interview. And now you'll have to do it again, but at an assessment centre. And this is where the last stage comes in, to do your prep work. You need to set yourself up for success when it comes to these latter parts of the recruitment process. So I'm going to go through how you can do this today. Here is a recruitment funnel which simply demonstrates how organisations progress their candidates through each stage of the recruitment process. In order for an organisation to be able to make 5 offers, they will need to see up to 3 times as many candidates at an assessment centre. It's not actually uncommon for 50% or more of candidates attending assessment centres to be offered positions if they perform well. That being said, we would advise that when you're offered multiple dates to attend an assessment centre, that you choose the earliest dates possible. And although you might prefer to give yourself the maximum amount of time to prepare for an assessment centre, it's not actually the best strategy to wait, and I'll tell you why. If an organisation has 10 positions to fill and they see 8 fantastic candidates at the first assessment centre, they will make 8 job offers. This means during those latter stages of the assessment centres, there will actually be less positions available and a reduced chance of success. And sometimes later scheduled assessment centres also get cancelled if they fill all of the roles from the earlier assessment centres. So my advice to you would be to book your place on an assessment centre as soon as you receive the invite and preference those earlier slots. In order to give yourself the best chance of success at assessment centre, we also advise conducting thorough research about the organisation, what they are selling, and the challenges that they may face in the industry and within the specific role that you are applying to. Easy ways in which to conduct this research include using a SWOT analysis, which looks at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing an organisation. You can also use a PEST analysis, where you identify political, economic, social and technological factors that could also be impacting the performance and success of an organisation. I'm sure that many of you may have come across these tools before at university. Brushing up on your research will help you to feel so much more confident when you're invited to an assessment centre. So remember to not just limit your research as well to browsing those first pages of an organisation's website. Peruse through the organisation's social media, their industry news, LinkedIn blogs, whatever you can find that add depth and other key literature that help you to get such a thorough understanding of the organization and the unique positioning of that business. It really will help you to feel so much more prepared when you go to the assessment center. So what does an assessment center involve? Well, you can expect the following types of activities at an assessment centre. Of course, you should expect interviews at some stage, and these could come up at the assessment centre. When you do have an interview, they are usually either competency-based, strengths-based, or technical, and that will be dependent on the type of role that you are going for. Team exercises are incredibly common at assessment centres, and this is where you are given a task and assessed on how well you interact within a group. Typically, the tasks will be problem solving, role play, or hands-on. Group debates are also rather common. You could be asked to do a panel interview where at least 2 members of a hiring team are interviewing you. You will also find that situational judgment tests could come up, and this is where you're presented with work-based scenarios and you have to decide what actions you would take. This might be multiple choice, but usually you would have to justify your answers. Work sample tests as well are another common feature of assessment centres, and this is where you're asked to perform a task that is similar to what you would be doing in the real life job. So we'll go on to that in more detail later on. Networking is something that could come up at assessment centres, particularly if they're in person, because you're going to be interacting with people all day. You might also be given a tour of the work site if you are in person, and Q&As are also another possibility as well. So there's plenty of different things that could be coming up in assessment centres, and we'll be going through the activities in more detail later on. So I would just quickly run through the typical structure of an assessment centre and some things for you to be aware of. So they can either usually be a full day or a half day, and they usually tend to be a full day if they're held in person, and a half day is more likely if they're going to be online. Now, what we would recommend is that you do arrive on time for your assessment centre. Obviously, if they're in person, then you need to make sure that you get to the location in good time and that you're not late, because that doesn't really start the day off very well. So make sure that, if you're catching a bus or a train, give yourself plenty of time to get there, and don't leave it too tight to risk being late to the assessment centre. If you're online, my advice to you would be, if you're using technologies like Zoom or Teams, make sure you've downloaded it prior to the assessment centre and tested that your technology works. So do test that your camera works, that your microphone works, you're able to get in and out okay, and then ensure that you are logged on to the session online at least a few minutes before the assessment centres are due to start. It will also mean that you don't have any technical difficulties if you've tried and tested everything before the day. So I would recommend that you definitely do that, but make sure you definitely arrive on time, whether you are doing it in person or whether you're doing it online. And next top tip in terms of the basics, you are going to be assessed multiple times. So a lot of candidates will stress out if they feel that they've done a bad job on one of the exercises. Typically, you probably haven't done as bad as you think you have, but also remind yourself that you're actually unlikely to fail after just one exercise. In an assessment centre, you are being assessed multiple times. So it mirrors the workplace in the sense that you won't be doing just one task, you'll be doing a variety. So keep that in mind. If something doesn't go to plan, don't scold yourself, just move on to the next task and refocus. Company preparation is also vital, so make sure that you've done plenty of thorough research beforehand so that you can go in feeling confident, and we've already mentioned some techniques you can use to do that, including your SWOT analysis and a PEST analysis. Also remember that all aspects of the day are going to be assessed to some degree, so you do need to keep focused, pay attention throughout, and make sure that you are actively listening to what is required of you and that you are responding appropriately to each of the tasks. And lastly, keep an open mind, because you actually can't predict what will come up. You can have some ideas from the research that you've done on the sector in the organisation, but at the end of the day, you just have to give it your best shot and try to relax, because the more relaxed and composed you are, the better you will probably perform. So here's the good news about assessment centres. Remember that recruitment funnel that I mentioned? Well, the good news is that if you have got through to an assessment centre, you are one of the final few. So you already have a much greater chance of success if you've got through to this stage. And you need to remind yourself that as you're going into it, because it will help you to believe in yourself. You are also not going to be in direct competition with others. So there's no need to put other people down or try to take over in any kind of group assessments or anything like that. It's very, very unlikely that you are going to be competing all of the time with people who are going for the exact same job as you. Many big graduate schemes that are running assessment centres are hiring for multiple different types of positions across their departments. So it doesn't mean that you're directly competing with each other. And in fact, you'll do a lot better if you're working together as a team than competing with each other. Assessors also want you to succeed, so don't be scared of them. They're there, they're looking for the right people to join their team, so they want you to do as well as possible. And at the end of the day, we do obviously have to assess how well you perform in the tasks, but do know that we want you to do well. You can also assess the organisation too whilst you're at the assessment centre. Remember, each of these recruitment processes, it's a two-way process. You're also seeing if you want to work at this organisation, and that's really important to see whether you get a good feel there, whether you think that you would fit in. Do you like the people that you've met at the interview? It all counts towards your overall impression of that organisation and the job that you're going for. And the good news is that feedback is generally available. So regardless of how you do at the assessment centre, you'll always be given feedback. And this is so useful, so you know what went well, what could have gone better. If you are unsuccessful after the assessment centre, that feedback is going to help you so much with the next one. And practice really does help when it comes to these. And lastly, most students enjoy them. They can be quite challenging, thought-provoking. You can meet some great people. So try and relax and just be yourself and focus when you are doing the tasks. But trust me when I say that most students and graduates really do have a good time when they're at an assessment centre. So that's something to look forward to. So why are assessment centres popular with recruiters? Well, they are a preferred method in recruitment because they have high predictive validity. And this means that they're very good at predicting someone's performance in a job role. This is largely because they use a variety of different elements. So I've already mentioned that we would assess candidates in a variety of different settings, just like we would in the workplace. So for example, in an assessment centre, you would have a mix of tasks, like you could be asked to do a written task, then a group task, and then you might do an interview. They are usually also marked by a number of different people, and this is a good thing because it helps to make the process fairer and more objective, because we get lots of different perspectives on the candidates. So to start with, let's take a look at individual assessment centre activities and how you can prepare for these. So let's move on to what they are. So individual assessment centre tasks are usually based on the type of work that you would be expected to do in the role. They are typically either scenario-based or task-based. So assessment centres often ask candidates to complete in-tray exercises, and these are work simulation assessments. With in-tray exercises, you'll often be presented with a fictitious workplace scenario, which usually requires you to catch up on or prioritise work that has built up. They will usually have strict time limits and will create the feeling of stressful work environment. The assessors are particularly looking for how well you make decisions whilst you're under pressure. You could also be given an impromptu presentation task, and you'd have to prepare this in a short period of time to present back to the assessors. You could also be asked to engage in role play where you're given information and a brief. And particularly common for management consulting and accountancy firms, you could be asked to complete case studies to test your analysis, creativity, and problem-solving skills. In a case study, the assessor will describe a situation and you'll need to respond with advice, either in the form of a report or a verbal explanation. Your conclusion is reached by collating and analysing the provided information. You could actually anticipate the type of case study that you could receive by researching the organisation and sector beforehand. Other types of tasks could also depend on the role that you are applying to. So, for example, if you apply for a role within PR and communications, you might be asked to complete a written task, such as compiling a press release. Or if you're applying to a role as a researcher, you might have to demonstrate that you have competent data analysis skills. So bearing this in mind, our top tips to you when completing individual assessment centre activities are to firstly, read all of the instructions before starting and take note of all of the details. The thing that you don't want to do in an assessment centre is to miss important details in a brief or be caught out by additional information that at first might not seem so obvious. So please make sure that you do read all of the instructions very carefully. Next, you need to work quickly but accurately. Remember, with these tasks, you are being assessed on your key competencies that are good predictors of your performance in the job role. So they're actually looking for things like accuracy, time management, organisation skills, decision-making, analysis. These are just some examples of what the assessors could be looking for. So you need to make sure that you are demonstrating those throughout. And lastly, keep track of the time. You will be under some sort of time pressure. So you don't want to get so wrapped up in the tasks that you've forgotten how long you've got left. So make sure you are checking the time throughout. Now I'm going to present you with a common individual assessment centre activity known as an in-tray exercise, which you could be asked to do. Today's example of an in-tray activity is the urgent versus important matrix, which you can see now on your screen. The matrix is split into 4 different boxes. You have quadrant 1, which is urgent/important, quadrant 2, which is not urgent/important, quadrant 3, which is urgent/not important, and quadrant 4, which is not urgent/important. What you should be doing with this urgent versus important matrix is deciding how best to prioritise work tasks. So I'm going to tell you how you go about doing that. In quadrant 1, which is urgent/important, these are for pressing problems. These are things with projects with close deadlines, and you need to be able to manage these activities, and they do need to be done. In quadrant 2, which is not urgent/important, you need to be able to focus on these activities and build in time to enable them. So this could be things like preparation, planning, new opportunities and relationship building. In quadrant 3, which is urgent/not important, these are activities that you could avoid. So these are things that might be interruptions from colleagues, some tasks that a colleague might ask you to do, like calls, or maybe even your emails or meetings that are unnecessary. And then you have quadrant 4, which is not urgent and not important. And these are the activities that you'd want to minimise. And these are the ones that you'd like to either say no to or give a date for when you can do them rather than quickly jumping to resolve others' issues. So this is a classic case of a planning and prioritisation task. If I was to present to you this planning and prioritisation task based on this urgent/important matrix, it would probably look something like this, which you see on your screen. Quite simply, you would be expected to read a brief and then move the tasks from the to-do list into the right quadrants, sorting them by priority into a blank copy of the urgent/important matrix. It should be quite straightforward. However, one thing that I'd like to stress to you is that it is very crucial before you start your task to ensure you have read all of the instructions and made note of all of the important details. When you're nervous, it's surprisingly easy to miss important details mentioned in the brief because you're in a rush to complete the timed task. So just to trip you up, in this example, one of the tasks that requires your attention is not specifically mentioned in the to-do list, and I've underlined it here in red. I couldn't tell you how many times this has tripped up students and graduates when running assessment centre simulations. It happens quite a lot. So now we have covered expectations for individual assessment centre tasks. Let's have a look at group assessment centre activities and what you could expect to find. So a group task that often comes up is a simulated meeting task. And this is where you might be asked to play a specific role to fulfill certain objectives. So assessors are particularly interested in the way that you analyse a situation in order to be able to get to the heart of the issue. In group assessment centre tasks, you could also be asked to creatively solve problems. So this could include fun challenges such as building the tallest tower using marshmallows and spaghetti. You may also partake in group debates where you're given a business scenario and asked to reach a logical conclusion. Usually, no member is designated leader, so candidates may be asked to lead the discussion in turn. And specific business challenges could also come up. So, for example, if you were working on a business challenge for a newspaper publication, you could be given the following question to provide recommendations for. How could the newspaper publication develop the readership and ultimately the subscription list, which costs $7.99 per month? You might be asked to come up with some solutions for that. So now I'm going to move on to some key advice for approaching group assessment centre activities. The first thing to note is the time. Typically, you will be given an allotted time to complete the group work. For example, could be 40 minutes. So the first thing you need to think about is how you're going to prioritise the time. If I were to give you a scenario where you were asked to review 4 options and then make a recommendation, this means you need to discuss a structure for how much time you will spend reviewing each of the 4 options, making notes for pros and cons of each, and then how much time you will spend deciding on your final option. Typically, if you're doing this online, assessors are going to be observing you with their microphones and cameras off. And if you're doing it in person, they will be in the room with you watching. They're going to be taking notes the whole time, watching your behaviours and actions. So when it comes to timekeeping, you do need to clearly show the assessors you're making an effort to watch the time. For the most effective timekeeping, suggest or volunteer to be a timekeeper. This is a specific role to keep the group on track and move them forward appropriately. This job isn't just about checking your watch or phone every so often. It requires you to actively inform the group of how much time is left and advise how much time should be spent on each part of the task. Assessors can't score you for simply checking the time on a phone or a watch. They could even mark you down for being a poor timekeeper. So it's worth reiterating that the assessors will always deliberately create a high-pressure environment. They want to see how resilient you are and how well you are responding to time stressors. So do you get flustered or lose your cool with other team members? Remember, the key is to remain composed throughout, even when you feel up against it. The next tip is to speak, but make sure you don't take over to the detriment of others in the group. A high-scoring group assessment centre task will see you actively contributing throughout. Ensure that you speak clearly, concisely, and confidently. And by actively contributing, that doesn't mean simply nodding and agreeing with the points of others all of the time. You are not expected to agree with every idea somebody contributes, just to keep things harmonious in the group. Assessors are keen to see you politely and respectfully challenge others, whilst also considering their points of view. They are also looking for you to be able to make significant and interesting contributions throughout. Another thing to be mindful of is how you speak to others within the group. If you don't like an idea and you immediately shut someone down, others in the group are less likely to come forward and tensions are going to begin to rise. It's important to stay calm and collected. You may not agree with every decision made, but win and lose as a team. Lastly, whatever you do, don't ignore the main speaker and start your own conversation with someone else in the group. This is something we've seen a lot, particularly in face-to-face assessment centres, and you'll likely lose marks for not supporting the main discussion. Next up is active listening. So another skill that assessors are looking for you to demonstrate is that you are actually listening to what is going on. And by active listening, we mean demonstrating you really are paying attention. You can do this in a number of ways. And first of all, if the assessment centre is online, you can actually make sure that you are engaging in non-verbal cues such as nodding and smiling. And if you're doing it face to face, look at the person who is speaking and give them eye contact. You need to be engaging as much as possible. Try and turn down your inner voice and make sure you're not jumping in to cut others off whilst they are in full flow and still speaking. Find the appropriate moments to respond. And to show that you've really listened to what has been said, ask questions and clarify details throughout. Check that everyone in the group has understood what has been discussed. Reflecting and summarising on what has been discussed is a really great way to demonstrate to the group and to the assessors that you've been listening and you're really engaged with the task. Another thing that can often cause a bit of a shock is the introduction of new information. In some group tasks, an assessor may throw a spanner in the works by changing the direction of the task or reducing the time limit, or maybe even doing both. In this situation, the assessor's looking for how well you respond to pressure and how you guide the team to a decision quickly and effectively. Be aware, this is quite common. Keep calm and respond as efficiently as you can. Remember, it mimics the way of the workplace. You have to be adaptable, and that's what we're looking to see here. I'm going to give you a real-life example of an assessment centre style activity used by employers when recruiting graduates to test competencies like resilience, teamwork, communication, problem solving, etc. You could either be doing this online on Zoom or Teams or in a room together. Either way, you will be observed throughout the whole activity on how you approach this task. So let me give you a hypothetical scenario. You've all recently joined the Birmingham Financial Services Limited business in various graduate roles: sales, IT, marketing, strategy and business development. The senior leadership team of the business have tasked you with a group with the following project: to review 4 options and then make a recommendation about how to meet the increasing space demands of the growing business. You have only been given access to one of the 4 options to read. So how exactly do you approach this task? I'm going to give you some final advice on how to ace a group assessment centre task, just like this. First tip is to help each other. One of the main competencies that assessors are scoring you on is your team working skills. Some of us are naturally more introverted and some of us are more extroverted. There will usually be 1 or 2 members of the team that will naturally take the leadership role and be the first brave ones to start speaking and initiate the discussion. But if this doesn't happen, start the discussion as quickly as possible. As soon as you start speaking, others will follow. One important top tip we would like to provide for you is that if you are getting stuck into discussion and you can see team members that are more hesitant or nervous to join, encourage their participation. Directly ask what they think about the points that are being made. Including quieter members of the team is a really positive indicator and shows that you are encouraging of others. Next tip is to identify roles. In an assessment centre group task, it's often helpful to think about delegation. Many people forget to assign roles that can aid efficiency and maximise your success. Play to your team's strengths. Depending on your task, ask questions when you begin and clarify what tasks and roles people feel most comfortable with. Now, there may not be a defined role for everybody in the group, but what is crucially important is that each member of the group is making useful contributions and everybody takes accountability. Even if you do not have a defined role, make sure that those who have taken on roles are performing them as they said they would. Otherwise, this could be a detriment of all of the team members. We have already discussed how useful it is to have a designated timekeeper. In some assessment centres, we won't see any students or graduates refer to the time left in the task once. If you've only been given 40 minutes to discuss something, we need to see that that person is actively performing their role and helping to guide the team to a decision before the end of the task. Many students and graduates will also make the assumption that leaders of the group will be the top performers in a task. This isn't the case. For graduate roles, organisations are more likely to require loyal followers than they are graduates with immaculate leadership skills at the beginning of their careers. Everyone in an assessment centre, whether they are a leader or not, can achieve top marks if they work well together, demonstrating all the key competencies the assessors are looking for. Make it obvious is the next top tip. Show the assessors you know what you're doing by stating exactly what you're doing. If you're summarising the points made during a discussion, use phrases such as, "To summarise, we have discussed." You can also really show the assessors you're paying attention by asking questions. Clarify that everyone knows what they're doing and what their responsibilities are. If you are including others in the group, use their names as well when asking for input. Also remember that you need to speak at an audible volume. There are many occasions I have sat through virtual assessment centres where I, as an assessor and team members on the call, haven't been able to hear what is being said. Have confidence in sharing your thoughts and make sure they are heard by the group. Next up, read the brief, then read it again. Mistakes are always more likely to happen when you are rushing. One thing we have seen over and over again as assessors is people not reading the brief correctly or mishearing or misreading the time they've been allocated for an activity. Digest the key details as quickly as possible and make sure to revisit the requirements of the task in the overall challenge. You don't want to waste time going off in tangents and rushing to get everything together by the end due to poor organisation. As assessors, we have seen so many groups of graduates scrambling to organise a final presentation in an assessment centre and completely running out of time. This often means it can be down to one person to present, and those who are not involved in the final presentation can be marked down. And lastly, it's not actually about the outcome of the task. During the group task, the assessor isn't going to be scoring you on getting the right answer or choosing the best option. They're more interested in how you justified that decision in the discussion. They're scoring you individually on your competencies, such as your team working skills, your drive, your critical thinking, your commercial awareness, and what you brought to the discussion. They want to see how you establish your relationships with others, engage your communication skills, and to see whether you treat others with respect and courtesy. Assessors will be impressed if you're supportive and you're encouraging. Do you involve other members of the group? Do you identify roles or split work to encourage a more efficient way of working? It's not really about the outcome of your discussion at all. There's often no right or wrong answer. Complete the task as well as you can, but most importantly, demonstrate exemplary team working skills. So thank you for watching. I hope that you feel a lot more prepared now for assessment centres that you might partake in the future. Very best of luck.